start by removing the shift lever as well as the left-hand foot peg. These need to come off so we can access the left side crankcase cover. Remove the small bolts holding the crankcase cover in place, and if you're unable to remove it, try tapping it with a rubber mallet to loosen it up a bit. Be sure to remove the old RTV sealant and apply a new bead before you reinstall the cover. Next, remove both spark plugs so we can turn the motor over by hand more easily. Also, disconnect the cam breather tube from the valve cover. Remove the bolts holding down the valve cover and remove it from the bike using this technique. Lift it up and rotate it forward, then slide it out to the right side of the bike. This will expose the valves. The CM450 is a single overhead cam with 2 intake valves and a single exhaust valve. The valve adjustments are made with a screw type adjuster. Its basic components are the lock nut, the adjuster screw, and the valve stem. We will put a feeler gauge in between the valve stem and the adjuster screw to check the clearance. To make adjustments, we loosen the lock nut and use an adjuster screw to change the clearance. Once we have spec clearance, we tighten the lock nut, holding it in place. Before we can work on the valves, we first need to retorque the cylinder head bolts. There are 8 bolts total, and they must be torqued to 23 foot-pounds each. A specific pattern must be followed when tightening them. This is the pattern to follow. The frame on this bike has access ports to reach the inside 4 bolts, and that makes it easier to work on. Next, turn your attention to the alternator flywheel. The bolt in the center must be rotated counterclockwise to spin the crankshaft. The small arrow at the top of the crankcase must align with a T timing mark. This indicates top dead center for one of the pistons. To get the top dead center for the other piston, just rotate the crankshaft bolt another 360 degrees. As you're rotating the crankshaft, you can watch the valves and rocker arms move. To test which is the top dead center piston, you can also feel the end of the rocker arm by hand to check for some looseness or clearance. To check the clearance, just slip the appropriate feeler gauge in between the valve stem and the adjuster screw. These valves are set too tight and the feeler gauge won't even fit. To make adjustments, first you loosen up the lock nut, then slip the feeler gauge between the adjuster screw and the stem while making slight changes to the adjuster screw. You want to feel a very slight drag on the feeler gauge. Once you're happy with the clearance setting, hold the adjuster in place while you are tightening the lock nut. Perform this procedure for each of the 3 valves, and then rotate the crankshaft 360 degrees to the T timing mark again, and do the same for the other piston and valve set. Generally speaking, it's better to have a slightly loose valve train as compared to a slightly tight one. A tighter valve train will keep the valves open, and that could cause damage. To reinstall the valve cover, slide it in from the right side and carefully lift it over the valve train. Make sure that the gasket is centered and then tighten down the valve cover bolts. Don't forget to reattach the cam breather tube. Next, install the spark plugs and put a fresh coat of RTV sealant on the crankcase cover before you install it. Replace the foot peg and the shifter and wait at least 12 hours before starting the bike so the RTV has time to cure.